Hello and welcome to the second webinar for the Young Pacific Leaders YPL Small Grants Program. My name is Haley Clemson and I'm an Assistant Program Officer at Cultural Vistas, which is supporting the YPL Small Grants Program. For those who have not worked with Cultural Vistas previously, I'll share a little bit about the organization to help you with the context. We're a nonprofit international exchange organization and the implementing partners for the YPL Small Grants Program, which is funded by the U.S. Department of State, made possible by the U.S. Department of State U.S. Mission to New Zealand. This is important to note because all of the YPL Small Grants deadlines and times will be synced with New Zealand time. And although they might not be listed in your time zone, please be aware that those are the way that the times are listed. The YPL Small Grants Program is a part of the YPL Initiative, a youth leadership development initiative organized by the U.S. Department of State. The YPL Small Grants Program was launched in 2018 and so far has had 5 iterations. This will be the 6th. Through the YPL Small Grants Program, YPL alumni have the opportunity to apply for seed grant funding to implement innovative projects throughout the Pacific region, focused on improving their communities, countries, and the region in one or more of the program's core pillars, which are education, environment and resource management, economic and social development, and civic leadership. To help interested alumni prepare to apply for this year's YPL Small Grants Program, Cultural Vistas is hosting these preparatory webinars to provide additional information and guidance to help teams with their project proposals. The first webinar took place last week and was focused on helping interested teams better understand what is required for the application, the program, and how to write a compelling and competitive proposal. This second and today's webinar is intended to help interested teams better understand the roles and responsibilities of each core team member and will help to provide a few different tips for you to consider while organizing a team and a project. Next week's webinar, which will be the final webinar, is taking place on the 30th of January and will review a thorough and detailed budget and budget justification narrative and the development of that. All webinars will be held at 9 a.m. New Zealand time via Zoom using the same access information that you used today. Webinar attendance is not required. However, it is strongly encouraged for you to attend or watch the recording as there will be more information provided to assist with applications as well as a chance to answer any questions that you have. It's also an opportunity to better understand the requirements for grant applications in general, not related to the YPL Small Grants Program. For those of you joining us live today, at the end of the presentation, we will have time for Q&A. Once we get to that section of the webinar, please raise your hand and we'll go to you for your question. You're also welcome to submit questions in the chat that we will answer at the end of the presentation as well. For anyone unable to attend the webinar live today who may be watching the recording, you can email questions to yplgrants@culturalvistas.org, and those will be answered and possibly discussed further during the next webinar. So with that, let's begin. On the screen, you'll find a brief program timeline. This is to outline for you the remaining webinar dates and program-related dates that you need to be aware of. We share this each week in the webinar so that any new attendees have an overview of the dates that they need to know as an applicant. You'll see that we have the final webinar next week, and we'll be covering the topic of budget curation and project management. Many of you have budget questions and we'll be able to answer those then. The webinar is scheduled again for the 30th of January at 9 a.m. New Zealand time and can be accessed via the same information that you used to join today's. Also listed in this timeline is the application deadline, an important thing to note, of course, and that is for the 3rd of February 2025 at 11:59 p.m. New Zealand time. You'll also see the expected notification time of selected applications, which is in late February 2025. Cultural Vistas will notify selected projects and non-selected projects via email at that time. Once the selected grantees are finalized and teams have confirmed their participation in the program, Cultural Vistas will begin travel arrangements for all 3 core team members to attend a mandatory kickoff workshop in Auckland, New Zealand over the dates of the 8th and 9th of April 2025. This workshop will prepare the selected core team members for the beginning of their small grants project implementation. Attendance during the workshop is required for all 3 core team members, and this date is important to note for anyone applying to share with their team members so that those selected know that they are expected to attend. Teams will implement projects from June through November of 2025. And once the project implementation period is complete, Cultural Vistas will arrange a debriefing seminar to discuss the learnings, challenges, and successes of the project implementation. That seminar is projected for early December of 2025 in Auckland, New Zealand, and all teams are required to have 1 core team member in attendance to be their representative. Today, we're going to discuss organizing a strong team to help you implement your small grants proposal ideas. For the YPL Small Grants Program, it is required that each proposed project include a project leader, a project treasurer, and a project secretary. These members will be deemed the core team members, and these are the key supporting members of the project and those who will ensure that the project is in line to meet the proposed goals, as any successful project needs a strong team behind it. The proposal requires outlining these 3 core team members, not only to make your proposal stronger by showing that you are 3 people supporting your project, but also to prepare a team to help delegate responsibility across the project during implementation if your project is selected. Many teams are made up of members who have their own jobs and work outside of the project. So it's important to have team members to work together with and share their responsibility. To submit a proposal, the team must meet the following eligibility requirements. At least 1 core team member must be a former YPL alumnus, meaning someone on your core team must have previously attended a YPL program. Not all core team members have to be an alumni, just 1 member of the core team. This can be any member of the core team. They can take on the role of project leader, treasurer, or secretary. There can also be more than 1 YPL alumni on the team if that's of interest. There are no restrictions on how many alumni can be a part of the core team, but at least 1 is required. All core team members must be between the ages of 25 to 40 and possess citizenship from a YPL member country, as well as be based within a YPL member country. U.S. citizens must demonstrate that their project is regionally focused outside of the United States and be part of a cross-country team or provide a cultural exchange element. This is due to the U.S. federal regulations outlined in the funding that makes this program possible. And this is also a great reminder for any project to collaborate across the Pacific. We've had many cross-country projects in the past and always support collaboration in YPL small grants projects. Consider your resources and other YPL alumni across the Pacific as you're developing your proposal. If your proposal does include a cross-country or exchange element, consider that your proposal may be stronger if you select core team members from each of those locations and countries so that you have a strong team with a presence in each and every project location. Additionally, if funds will be used across different countries, we encourage you to have in-depth conversations with your team members at the beginning before the project application is submitted to discuss the portion of funding available to each program component to ensure that you are agreed on with expectations at the start of building out your budget. Another eligibility requirement is that the project must address at least one of the following YPL pillar themes, so education, environment and resource management, civic leadership, or economic and social development. And lastly, previous YPL Small Grants Program core team members, so any past project leaders, treasurers, or secretaries are ineligible and may not reapply for the program. You can find these eligibility requirements listed on the application as well and can revisit them at any time. As you put together your project proposals and especially your project teams, it's important to understand these roles, what the responsibilities and requirements are for each specific core team member. So with that, we'll discuss them more in depth. Starting with the project leader, the project leader is the person who holds the overall responsibility for the successful implementation, initiation, planning, design, execution, monitoring, and closure of the small grants project. The project leader is the head of the project implementation and will help to delegate responsibilities to other members of the project, especially the other core team members. They will help manage and guide the team as well as the different phases of the project as they are developed and implemented. The project leader is the go-to person for the project and will need to be the most flexible of the three core team members, given that they may need to step in at any certain times to help ensure all phases of the project are moving in accordance with the work plan. They also need to be the leader of those supporting and working on the project and must set clear, achievable goals for the project in consultation with the other core team members. They will ultimately be the role that ensures that the team is following all the requirements and meeting all of the program deadlines. So they must be organized and they must empower their core team members to stay on top of their own roles. It's very important for project teams to work collaboratively together towards the project goals, with each core team member having their set of individual goals and responsibilities. As the core team, and more specifically the project leader in this role, you must try to build a team that works together with common aims, all working towards the same final goals for your project. This groundwork should be set at the time of project application, which is why we discuss it so in depth in these webinars. And that's because as a team, you must choose to apply with other team members that will work closely together over the whole of the year, and you must be confident in the team that you're building at this stage. One of the biggest pieces of the project leader's role is clear and open communication. Throughout the YPL Small Grants process, as projects are developed, selected, and implemented, communication is key to ensuring project success. It's important that the core team operate harmoniously, as the project can only be successful with the work of all members and their respective roles. Often the project leader is the guide and force behind ensuring open communication among team members, and also in communicating with cultural vistas. Project leaders are expected to keep cultural vistas up to date on major project updates, issues, as well as provide project-related information as needed or requested. The next core team position is that of the project treasurer. The project treasurer will handle all finances of the YPL Small Grants project, including the receiving of grant funds, budget tracking, budget management, and providing budget updates. The treasurer should be able to receive the small grants fund transfers to their bank account from a U.S. bank. It's required that upon project selection, that the project treasurer provide their banking information for the funds to be dispersed to the project. More information will be provided on that should your project be selected. Throughout the implementation period, the treasurer will be instrumental in the project budgeting and budget tracking to ensure that the expenses are in line with that of the approved budget. The treasurer should continue to keep track of funds and expenses, as well as have an organized system for logging receipts of related project purchases throughout the full project implementation period. Each monthly report, they'll need to provide budget updates, including a narrative as well as receipts for each expense, to the project secretary, who will be submitting the reports to Cultural Vistas throughout the implementation period. Again, it's important that this person is trustworthy, organized, and reliable. Small grants project funds will be distributed in 3 separate intervals throughout the program. The first will be at 60% at the beginning of implementation. In the middle of implementation, teams will receive 35% of the approved funding. And finally, at the end of the project, once it is completed, the remaining 5% of the funds will be sent to teams. It's important that the treasurer and the whole core team understand this at the time of application and understand the responsibility of tracking those funds as they're received in these different allotted amounts. Again, the person acting as project treasurer should be trustworthy, organized, and have a bank account to receive the funds. As well as they should be prepared to track the expenses and keep an organized log of program receipts. Considering that small changes to your budget may be necessary during implementation, they should be able to make suggestions to your team on how funds can be moved around and must be able to communicate any changes needed to the funder, being Cultural Vistas, or their team leader to communicate out. If your project treasurer, once you decide who they may be for your project, has any questions, we highly recommend they attend the next webinar, as it is on budget, construction, and management. Last of the core team members, but certainly not least, is the project secretary. The project secretary will compile all monthly, midterm, and final reports and submit them with the provided instructions from Cultural Vistas. The project secretary's role also includes managing communications like project narratives, photo documenting, and social media engagement. The person in this role will also communicate project updates to Cultural Vistas often. Failure to provide up-to-date information on the status of a project and the required reports in a timely fashion will or could result in the loss of funding for the project. It's important to pick a project secretary who is organized, good at communicating, and able to follow all deadlines. While you're putting together the project proposal, it's very important to consider your team and the responsibilities associated with each of these roles, as well as the skills and time commitment needed to fulfill each role. A synchronized and reliable team helps to ensure smooth and successful project implementation and provides a strong support system for the project in helping to reach those project goals. In all the roles and within the team, it's important to maintain clear and open communication. Each core team member should ensure that the other core team members know what is going on with the project, especially when it comes to reaching those project goals and objectives. Understanding any delays that might be happening or having knowledge of issues. All of these affect all of the core team members and the responsibilities that they are required to fulfill. This is why putting together a project proposal and ensuring a strong team will impact each part of your project implementation. It will require that all roles step in and fill their responsibilities in order for the project to succeed. For example, submitting your required monthly reports with a strong core team will be a team effort. The project leader may be overseeing the reports are ready on time and that the other core team members are on top of their responsibilities and have the support that they need. They may also be monitoring the overall progress of the project in relation to the work plan and are responsible for contacting Cultural Vistas with any updates or concerns before the submission deadline of each report. Understanding what information must be provided to the funders and ensuring that it is communicated through email or reporting is an important role of that leader. In the same scenario, a project treasurer would be working on their portion of the report, a budget report, and any receipt tracking. They should be able to get this to the secretary in time to include it in the monthly report submission. Lastly, the secretary would be compiling all of this information needed for the monthly, midterm, or final report and making sure that it is submitted on time and meets the deadline. As you can see, strong teamwork is needed to meet these deadlines, and communication across the team can ensure that project implementation in each aspect runs smoothly. This is just one example of why a core team is important. Now that you know more about each role and the responsibilities associated with that role, here are some things to consider while putting together your team and how you may successfully work together. Firstly, you'll never stop hearing us say how important communication is, but as you're building your team, you want to think about methods of communication. What methods work best for those who you're taking on as core team members? Additionally, it's important to think through what other team capacity you may need. For example, if it's an exchange program or workshop, you may need volunteers. Spelling out who on the core team will be responsible for managing those types of project pieces is also important. Delegating and clearly communicating additional roles is important not only for those volunteers in understanding who they report to, for example, but also in building out your team with a clear designation of who on the core team would be managing those volunteers. Also, scheduling and time commitment. While 6 months is not a long time in terms of project implementation, it's important to remember that when thinking about the scale of your project, 6 months can be a long time in terms of the commitment for those involved and the time that your core team members are willing and able to give to the project, especially when they're balancing work and school commitments on top of the project. It's imperative that those signing on to the project as a core team member can commit the time needed to implement and fulfill the full project requirements throughout the program's entirety from June to November. They must also be available for program commitment before and after the implementation period, from project selection until the debriefing seminar. Let's revisit some of the larger time commitments that need to be communicated to your core team members for the YPL Small Grants Program. The first is the YPL Small Grants Kickoff Workshop. To help selected teams digest the information, understand the requirements further, and have the opportunity to refine their projects, make final budget adjustments, and get feedback on their projects, all 3 core team members are required to attend a kickoff workshop in Auckland, New Zealand over the dates of the 8th and 9th of April, 2025. All programming and expenses for this workshop will be covered by YPL and arranged by Cultural Vistas, so you do not need to budget for this in your project proposal. However, all core team members need to be made aware of this date and be willing and able to commit to that time commitment. Also, an important time commitment is the debriefing seminar. At the conclusion of the program, a debriefing seminar will be held where all teams will be asked to represent the project and share the successes, challenges, highlights, and more of the past 6 months. This is projected to take place in early December of 2025, also in Auckland, New Zealand. For this seminar, all 3 core team members are not required to attend. Rather, teams will be asked to send a team representative from their core team to travel and attend this seminar. This can be the team leader, treasurer, or secretary, but only one team representative from each team. Again, all programming and expenses for this seminar will be covered by YPL and arranged by Cultural Vistas, so you do not need to budget for this in your project proposal. However, you must understand that one person from each core team is required to attend. We mention these dates now as it's important that someone from your team be committed to attending, as it is a requirement, but also because there will be deadlines to prepare for this seminar in which we encourage all team members to prepare together and reflect together on the project work that they have completed. For more information on team and program requirements, we suggest that you go to the Cultural Vistas YPL Small Grants website, where you can also find the information on program requirements listed in the application itself, which is linked on the website. You can also find the application link in an email previously sent to the YPL network, or also in the YPL alumni Facebook group. Before we move on to questions, now that you have a better idea of the roles and responsibilities of the core team, here are a few more things to consider as you're developing your project proposals. Put a great deal of thought into your project team members and be sure to understand the commitment that each is making. For those proposals that are planning a project across countries, keep in mind differing time zones, currencies, cultural traditions, customs, and preferred and accessible methods of communication. It's helpful to ensure that you have clarified the processes and activities that will lead to the project's outputs and deliverables while thinking through creating your work plan at the time of proposal development. When considering your work plan, it's also helpful to develop one that provides you with the information that enables your team to estimate properly the budget and resources that you need and defines the project's goals and scope clearly. This will help you to visualize the entire project and see the interdependencies between project responsibilities and the roles of the core team members. This will also help show the task breakdown across core team members and other supporting team members for the project, as well as how to forecast your resource requirements within the funding disbursement timeline that you were showed earlier. Going off of that, when developing your timeline, make sure that the funding disbursement timeline matches your work plan timeline and that your timeline will be feasible with the amount of funding that you have at any given time during implementation. I highlight this now, but this will be revisited in far more detail during next week's webinar on budgeting. Another thing to consider is monitoring and evaluation. It's an important piece of your project. Thinking about how you will be tracking the project pieces and what methods work best for your team is very helpful when it comes to monitoring and evaluation. You should think through the different monitoring and evaluation methods for tracking your project's progress in accomplishing those goals and objectives. This allows you to keep your project on task and have an understanding throughout implementation of whether you are on track to meet those goals. Another important piece to think about as you address team roles and responsibilities is that your plan for longer-term sustainability needs to be thought through, especially if you need public-facing communication strategies developed at the beginning of your project to help prepare for that. Social media is a great tool and should be considered as you're developing those team goals and responsibilities. Planning for the unexpected is something else to consider. Last and certainly not least, do you have a backup plan for various components of your project? If yes, what other resources may be needed for that? Planning for the unexpected is important at this stage as anything can happen throughout implementation that you may not have foreseen. And planning for it now will give your team the tools to address those challenges as they arise. It's important not only to think about the required pieces of your project proposal, but additionally those pieces that will occur after implementation begins. We mention this now because the proposal sets the scene for the project implementation period, and mitigating for unexpected things in your planning can help. That is everything we have for you in this webinar. Now we'll move on to questions and answers. I'll check the chat for any questions that may already be there. Please also feel free to raise your hand on Zoom or unmute if you have any questions that you'd like to ask. Looks like there's no questions in the chat yet. Does anybody have any questions on creating your core team and developing a team for a YPL Small Grants project?
I do. One of our core team members does not have.
Okay.
So that's it. Yeah, they're stuck on the application online right now.
So this is a great question. This is a question that we have received in the past. The reason that having a passport is a requirement for the program is due to the requirements, the required commitments in the timeline, such as the kickoff workshop and the debriefing seminar. So due to all core team members being required to attend the kickoff workshop that takes place in April, you must be able to show that all core team members have at least applied for a passport.
Okay.
If they have not applied, make sure that they do so as soon as possible, or consider choosing a different core team member, just because everybody needs to be able to travel internationally in April.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. And if they have applied for a passport but don't have it in hand yet, you can upload any proof of that passport renewal or application as part of your project application instead of the passport bio page itself.